Hello everyone, Maurice here. Today bringing you another meta report for Axie Infinity Origins Season 7. Now it's the late rare era, so another or less than 2 days to go, I think, before the end of the rare era. So hopefully you're pushing hard or just enjoying the meta. So I must say the meta has been actually looking pretty good, even at the top. And the reason is that there's actually quite a number of different archetypes. So in this case, actually 6 different archetypes at the very top. So when I say very top, meaning at top 30 something. So um, yeah, I think it's definitely not as dominating as expected in terms of sponge. So it's always good to see other archetypes that are well be able to adjust and counter sponge in a certain way. So the other thing that I wanted to actually talk about maybe is Purge, just to mention that maybe it is something that of course it's a very expensive archetype, but maybe something that could be fun and could be good for climbing. Okay, so yep, that's basically the gist, and yeah, I'll get into the other archetypes as well. But effectively, is that the dominance of Sponge definitely has decreased, and as people really learn about how to play against it and how to attack against it. Okay, so player-based statistics. Yeah, I think, well, now we have more than 50,000 players in total, of course, as usual. Yeah, most of, not most, but quite a number is less than 500 victory stars, meaning that we just play a number of games and that's it, and which is quite normal. Every time there will be new players just try it out, then never really progress, which is fine. That's quite normal. So the main thing is more about the retention rate. So one thing that I should talk about is actually the number of players in Challenger is actually getting to close to 800, and then that just means at the end of the era, I would expect probably more than 1,000 players getting the Challenger. So that's kind of the range that you should be expecting. And yeah, in terms of the number of players, there are quite a number of players actually get to Tiger, which is nice. It's because these, I would say, are players that are really more serious about the game, and they play enough to get to Tiger, right? So that's already some achievement, and that's actually about, I think, yeah, 10,000 players around there, right? More than that, that's at that level, meaning, realistically speaking, there are about 10,000 people, playing Origins, at a, at least the somewhat serious level. Of course, there will always be people in between, but interestingly, it's actually like some of this is going down, meaning, of course, some people are shifting to Tiger, but then not a lot of new players actually make it up. So yeah, so that's kind of the overall trend. Okay, in terms of archetype, I only look at Challenger this time is because, yeah, it's API issue and stuff like that. I mean, it just takes a bit longer. And in a way, Challenger itself is already diverse enough that it kind of gives you an idea of what's actually happening. Of course, further down, you'll see the lower performing archetypes, probably things like Leafy, Topaz that you don't really see much here. But the gist of it is, of course, looking at what's good, right? And you can see, actually, I'll scroll up a bit first and see that about 30 something players actually get to above 2,000 victory stars, and another 100 something players are at the second bracket here. So yeah, the very top 30 something players, well, actually pretty good diversity in the sense that they have sponge, there's spikes, there's poison, there's anemone, and then there's sustain, of course, and also confused as well. And there's a small amount of Sando. Sando is slowly making up there, but maybe not as competitive as the others. But also something that's worth noting, I think, is Purge. Right, you can see quite a significant amount of Purge over here as well. You don't see much at the bottom is because Purge is a very specific archetype in a sense that you really need very specific setups, specific axes to succeed, but definitely can be at the very high level. So that's the power level is actually up there. It's just very hard to get those axes, and maybe not a lot of people play it. So okay, and let's go further down from the top with 30 something, so the top 100 something players, then you start to see Feather, like AoE basically, and then Sandals, of course, a bit more as well, and also Jinx. So Jinx is actually still quite strong, especially with the buff mechanic of getting 1 to 3, what's that called? The Jinx Yeah, I forgot what it's that called, but like the count that will increase your jinx damage. Before it's just one by one, and now sometimes if you get very unlucky, it will just uh, scale very quickly. So that's why Jinx I think is actually in a pretty good spot as well. Even though of course compared to others might not be the best, but still it's definitely viable. A triple R as well is the other one that's worth mentioning, and probably hot butt maybe. So it's only when you go further down that you see other archetypes, and I must say it is I won't say as good as it can get, but at least it's pretty good in terms of the meta, in terms of diversity. That you see different archetype being able to succeed. So the main I won't say problem, but my hope is of course that some of those old favorites, effectively like Topaz, like Leafy, or even like Fury, like Aggro. Hopefully those a lot of those as I haven't mentioned as well, but like those can also make a comeback would be great is because there are a lot of Axies, a lot of Leafy Axies, a lot of Topaz Axies out there, right? But then, especially for people from before, many seasons before, they had only have those Axies, and now they come back, they don't really, it's not really performing, so it's not the best. So I think in terms of really just attracting old players back, when I say old, I mean a few seasons ago, right? Those players back to Origins, I feel like making those Axies useful, competitive would be a nice thing, but maybe that will be for next season. Okay, let's get into the win rate. So the win rate, I must say, it's of course some of these numbers are like a bit skewed in the sense that, like for example, Sandals, there are not many matches played with Sandal, and that's why it could be a bit unreliable. But you can see that at the very top, if you want to get to two, 2000 plus victory stars, let me make it smaller to make it easier to see. And where you can see that you have to be consistently above 60% win rate, I think, in order to get to the very top. So these are the basically 6 archetypes that can make it, except for I guess Sandals and Perch is used relatively rarely, so this number is not too reliable, I would say. But the other thing that I do want to mention is the perch at this level, right? So getting towards 20,000 is actually pretty high, meaning this win rate, well, can be quite high. And of course, part of the reason is that it's probably only a few player playing it, and it's a relatively optimized teams compared to the others, and maybe that's why it has an edge. But it definitely shows that it's definitely viable to climb. Yeah. Okay. So then let's just go into the matchups specifically. Okay, and this is where you need to look at the whole thing, and you can see Sponge, of course, is a pretty good matchup, but doesn't mean that it's always good. Meaning, of course, I should say that this, of course, is a general matchup for the whole challenger tier, which is about I think 800 players and now, right? Of course, there will be quite a lot of not so optimized teams. Having said that, there's definitely some trends we can talk about. One thing is that yeah, Triple R is really suffering against Sponge just because I guess Triple R is just not fast enough. It takes a while. Um, but Perch can actually be pretty good against Sponge, so that's actually something that's worth noting. Maybe like it can raise Sponge in a way. Uh, yeah, so Jinx, of course, is the other one that I think I mentioned last time as well. Okay, and then I should talk about Feather or AoE. AoE is actually not bad. You can see that most of the matchups are actually pretty good. The only tough one really is Spike. Spike is really taking advantage of the AoEs. Yeah, Spike is really tough, of course. Every time you use a Feather Dagger or something, it will proc the spikes and it will just make the tri-spikes damage a lot stronger. So that's why it's just tough. Every archetype will have certain tough matchup. Anemone is actually very even in terms of matchup, except Triple R. So that's a pretty interesting one. My assumption is because of the Triple R usually have 2 taunts and they juggle the taunts around and making it a bit hard for the Anemone to knock out any Axies. So that's yeah, I guess the tough matchup for Anemone, and then of course Sustain is always tough matchup with Jinx, but Sustain actually is in a not a bad spot is because it does well against the top. I would say the top three. Top three will be Sponge, Spikes, and Poison. Those are the when I say top three, I mean more popular, most popular three. And then I should really talk about Purge, right? That's because Purge seems to have quite good potential because it actually does pretty well against Sponge, but very well against Spikes and Poison. Of course, always have bad matchup, right? And in this case, the Feather and Lemonade, those are the tough matchup for Purge because the damage is just so fast, right? Whereas Spikes, Poison, and Sponge, the damage comes a lot slower and gives a lot more time for the Purge player to get to his setup and deal a lot of damage. So yeah, so I think if you don't really see that much feather and anomaly, if you see a lot of the top three, then maybe you might want to buy a purge team, but of course it's very expensive, have to be very specific in terms of the setup. So yeah. Okay, and that is basically it in terms of what I want to cover. Of course, do check out a blog post with more extra information, data on, in this case, the spread of when people play per hour for different V-star bracket for different archetypes, and of course more matchup details for each V-star bracket. Of course, each bracket for me is 100 V-star point. So yeah, do check that out, and that's it. And I'll see you in the next video.